World War II witnessed incredible technological advancements in the form of weapons, some of which could wipe out whole cities. However, where precision and accuracy were needed, the US and German armies relied heavily on rifles. Among the most iconic firearms of this era were the German Sturmgewehr 44 and the American M1 Garand. Both weapons, each exceptional in their own way, played crucial roles in shaping the outcomes of numerous battles. After World War I ended, each nation took scores. They realized they would need better weapons for the next war if there were a next. Lessons learned from the limitations of bolt-action rifles and the devastating impact of machine guns prompted military engineers to develop more advanced firearms. So they got to work creating different kinds of weapons, some of which were now mobile, like tanks. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the start of the Second World War, they depended on the Karabiner 98K bolt-action rifle. They were so good that those confiscated from the German armies were refurbished and used in the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Karabiner 98K was developed by Mauser, a German arms manufacturer, as a derivative of the Gewehr 98 rifle, which was used by German forces during World War I. To operate the Karabiner 98K, the soldier would have to cycle the bolt after each shot to eject the used cartridge so a new one could drop into the chamber. The downside to this design was that it slowed down their rate of fire. Before cycling that bolt, the weapon of the enemy would have taken you down. However, during World War II, battles had shifted to closer quarters and more urban environments, and it became clear to the Germans that they would need a more versatile weapon, something that could fire faster without the downtime of reloading. By this time, the Americans had joined the war, so the 98K struggled to compete with the semi-automatic weapons used by the Allies. By mid-1942, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, which started the previous year, was picking up speed. The Germans were pushing hard to capture Stalingrad during their summer offensive, but as soon as they got into the city, things got intense and chaotic. Stalingrad was a more urban area, and fighting in a place like that was a whole different ballgame. It turned into brutal house-to-house and street-by-street combat. The Soviet defenders, led by General Vasily Choykov, were smart about using the damaged cityscape to their advantage. They engaged the Germans in close-quarters combat, making the most of the rubble and ruins to create ambush points and defensive positions. Every building and every street corner became a battleground, and it was all about who could outlast the other in this harsh environment. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus, a massive counteroffensive aimed at surrounding the German forces in Stalingrad by hitting their weaker flanks. Just a few days later, by November 23rd, the Soviet forces had managed to encircle the 6th Army, trapping about 300,000 Axis troops inside the city. Imagine being surrounded with no way out. That's what the Germans were facing. Extreme times called for extreme measures, and the Germans needed to act fast. They needed a weapon that could bridge the gap between the long-range accuracy of bolt-action rifles and the rapid-fire capability of submachine guns. This was the birth of the Sturmgewehr 44. It combined the precision of single shots at medium range with the rapid automatic fire needed for close-quarters combat. Before this, Hugo was already busy experimenting with different designs. One major lesson he learned from World War I was that 7.92mm rifles just weren't cutting it in trench warfare. So, Hugo developed a compact automatic weapon using pistol caliber rounds that were small, lightweight, and had reduced recoil, though they sacrificed some long-range accuracy. This was the Bergmann Maschinenpistol MP-18, introduced in 1917. The stormtroopers found it particularly useful for their infiltration tactics. Instead of head-on assaults, they focused on sneaking past enemy strongpoints and attacking weaker sections, creating chaos behind enemy lines. This experience laid the groundwork for the development of the StG44, which aimed to provide a versatile, all-purpose weapon for the German infantry, perfectly suited for the varied combat conditions they faced during World War II. In 1934, the Heereswaffenamt, which was the central agency in charge of producing weapons for the German Army, started working on a new mid-range cartridge. This new cartridge had a short case and reduced powder charge, but it could still maintain target accuracy up to 400 meters. Fast forward 4 years and C.G. Haenel was brought on board to develop a machine carbine for this new short cartridge. The idea was to create a weapon that could function both as a submachine gun and a squad automatic rifle. Stamped metal parts were to be used for this production to make it easier and faster because they were right in the middle of a big war. Hugo Schmeisser, Haenel's chief design engineer, took on this challenge. He came up with the 7.92 by 33 mm Kurz round, which was powered by gas. Hugo designed the rifle to be more controllable with the barrel and stock in a straight line, which helped reduce recoil. He also positioned the sights higher than usual above the barrel for better accuracy. Plus, he added a pistol grip for the trigger hand, which was a pretty new feature at the time. All these innovations came together to create a versatile and effective weapon that was ahead of its time. By July 1942, the first 50 prototypes of the new weapon were ready. Some of these were airdropped to German troops isolated in Cholm, Russia, and they testified that the rifles were, in fact, very effective. This early success caught a lot of attention, and soon other firearms firms like Mauser, Steyr, and Irma started submitting their own competing proposals. This competition ended up delaying the production process. Initially, the rifle was named the Maschinenkarabiner 42, or MP42, and then later reclassified under the new name Maschinenkarabiner 43. This was an agenda to get Hitler's approval. He was worried that producing the Kurz round would strain resources already dedicated to making the standard 7.9 mm rifle rounds, which were stockpiled in the millions. But by the time Hitler discovered this reclassification hoax, the overwhelmingly positive reports coming in from the Eastern Front convinced him to allow the continued production of the MP43. The soldiers on the front lines were raving about its performance, which made a strong case for its continued use. So, despite his initial concerns, Hitler permitted the MP43 to keep rolling off the production lines, seeing its impact on the battlefield. By 1944, the weapon got a new name, Sturmgewehr, which translates to assault rifle. This name change marked the StG44 as the first successful assault rifle. What made it stand out was its intermediate cartridge, which combined the power of a full rifle round and the controllability of a submachine gun round. It could fire automatically and had a more compact design compared to traditional battle rifles. It was easier to handle, especially in close-quarters combat, and had a higher rate of fire. Whoever held this gun in combat would definitely have the upper hand because not only would you shoot fast, but you would move fast too. The StG44 was designed to be effective at engaging targets within a few hundred meters, which was perfect for most combat situations. Plus, it was easy to maintain. You could field strip it into 6 parts, with the upper and lower receivers connected by a hinge behind the magazine well. It weighed 10.19 pounds empty and 11.06 pounds with a 30-round curved magazine. It was light enough to carry. In terms of firepower, the StG44 could fire about 500 rounds per minute in automatic mode and had a maximum effective range of around 600 meters. This combination of features made it exactly the kind of weapons the Germans needed to gain an edge in the war. The intermediate 7.92 by 33 mm Kurz cartridge offered a balance between power and recoil, allowing soldiers to maintain control during automatic fire while achieving significant stopping power. The StG44's ability to fire approximately 500 rounds per minute at a muzzle velocity of 2,250 feet per second, along with its maximum effective range of 600 meters, gave German troops an unfair advantage. For instance, during the Ardennes offensive of 1945, the casualties experienced by two German paratrooper divisions were quite different. The 5th Division suffered almost 9,000 losses, whereas the 3rd Division incurred only about 2,500. The key difference was that the 3rd Division was better equipped with Sturmgewehr 44s. On the other side of the Atlantic, Americans who joined the war in 1941 wanted to equip their soldiers with a weapon that could easily deliver sustained firepower. As soon as the war ended in 1918, U.S. ordnance began desperately searching for an auto-loading infantry rifle. The problem was that only they knew what they wanted, so most of the designs submitted by various inventors failed to meet the Army's requirements. They were either too heavy or the caliber was too small. Among these investors was a young Canadian-born inventor named John Cantius Garand, who managed to come up with a design that was quite close. Springfield Armory in Massachusetts hired him to complete his design. But not long after he started, what seemed promising eventually hit a dead end. His design wasn't good enough. Garand had to go back to the drawing board and come up with a new design. He developed a rifle that operated using the propellant gases from the fired bullet to cycle the action, a semi-automatic rifle. Garand's design outperformed all the competitors and was adopted as the standard U.S. infantry rifle in 1936, a full 18 years after World War I ended. The following year, the U.S. Army began mass-producing the M1 Garand at Springfield Armory, and by 1938, the first rifles were delivered to the Army. It quickly showed its value, so production rates gradually increased, and any issues that came up were ironed out during these pre-war years. While they were at it, the drums of war had started rolling, but not in Europe. It was in Asia. Throughout the 1930s, Japan was taking over parts of Asia bit by bit. Then, in 1937, right when the U.S. began cranking out the M1 Garand, Japan decided to invade China. This kicked off the Second Sino-Japanese War. The U.S. quickly realized that China could be a key ally against Japan, so they jumped in to help out. The U.S. started sending military and economic support to China through the Lend-Lease program. The idea was that by bolstering China's defenses, they could put more pressure on Japan and keep them busy. This support wasn't just about helping out a friend, it was a strategy to create an obstacle for Japan, potentially preventing them from further expansion and buying the U.S. and its other allies more time to prepare for any potential conflicts. The last nail in the coffin came in 1939, when the U.S. imposed economic sanctions on Japan. Meanwhile, things were also heating up in Europe. Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, and this move kicked off World War II. Just a couple of days later, on September 3, 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany in response. World War II was now in full swing. It was becoming clear that the impact of the war would eventually reach America, and they needed to be prepared. This meant ramping up their production of weapons. The Winchester Repeating Arms Company was brought in as a second source to help produce the M1 Garand. This move was all about making sure they had enough firepower to be ready for whatever came next. In July 1941, the U.S. put an oil embargo on Japan, which was a big problem because Japan needed oil to keep its war machine running. Without oil, they wouldn't have the energy to continue their expansion, and it would give China a better chance in their fight against Japan. One morning on December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise military strike on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, which was the main base for the United States Pacific Fleet. This attack was massive. Over 350 aircraft launched from 6 aircraft carriers hit battleships, destroyers, and aircraft on the ground. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, and nearly 1,200 were wounded. 8 battleships were damaged, with 4 being sunk, and a bunch of other ships and aircraft were either destroyed or seriously damaged. This was an open invitation to the U.S. to join the war. After that, the M1 Garand rifle became a top priority for American production. Both Springfield and Winchester went into overdrive, working around the clock to crank out these rifles. The United States became the first and only country during World War II to equip its troops with an auto-loading rifle as the standard infantry weapon. This meant that while other armies were still using bolt-action rifles, the U.S. troops had the semi-automatic M1 Garand, allowing them to fire more quickly and efficiently. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a game changer on the battlefield. Unlike those old bolt-action rifles where you had to cycle the bolt after every shot manually, the M1 Garand had a semi-automatic mechanism that let soldiers fire off 8 rounds as fast as they could pull the trigger. This rapid-fire capability was a huge advantage in combat because it meant soldiers could keep up a high rate of fire and react quickly to any threats. It's no shocker that the U.S. was part of the Big Three, countries that won the Second World War. The M1 Garand used a gas-operated system, which basically means that the propellant gases from the fired bullet cycled the action. It was a super reliable and efficient system, reducing the chances of jams and misfires. It also used an 8-round in-block clip, making reloading easy. Soldiers could reload quickly, even under fire, which kept them in the fight without much downtime. Although the ping sound of the clip being ejected was sometimes criticized as potentially giving away a soldier's position, it was not a huge drawback in the heat of battle, where noise was prevalent. The M1 Garand was chambered in .30-06 Springfield, a powerful cartridge. It gave the rifle range, accuracy, and stopping power. It was effective at all sorts of distances, from close-quarters combat to shooting targets a few hundred yards away. The M1 Garand also had an adjustable rear sight, which allowed soldiers to make precise adjustments for elevation and windage. With iron sights, it was accurate up to 500 yards, providing effective firepower over long distances. The best part was the semi-automatic design, which allowed soldiers to stay mobile during fights. They could move, take cover, and keep firing without the annoying interruptions you'd get with bolt-action rifles. The StG44 was revolutionary for its time. It was about 37 inches long, which made it ideal for urban combat. Imagine trying to fight in narrow streets or buildings. This gun was perfect for that. One of the best things about it was that you could break it down into 6 parts easily, so if something went wrong, soldiers could fix it on the go. Another great feature was the use of stamped metal parts instead of the usual machined ones. This made it faster and cheaper to produce, which was crucial during the war when they needed a lot of weapons quickly. The design of the StG44 with the barrel and stock in a straight line helped manage the recoil better. This meant that even when firing in full auto, it was easier to control, which is a big plus in a firefight. It weighed around 10 pounds empty, so it was light enough to carry around without wearing soldiers out. The M1 Garand was a bit longer and heavier than the StG44, measuring about 43 inches and weighing around 9.5 pounds empty. Even though it was bulkier, it was really well balanced, so it wasn't too hard to handle. The best part about the M1 Garand was its semi-automatic operation. Unlike bolt-action rifles where you had to cycle the bolt after each shot manually, the M1 Garand let you keep firing as fast as you could pull the trigger. This was a massive advantage in a fight, as you could keep your aim steady and fire rapidly without missing a beat. The M1 Garand was also known for its durability. Firepower and rate of fire. In terms of firepower and rate of fire, the StG44 could switch between semi-automatic and automatic modes, which was a huge advantage. In full auto, it could fire about 500 rounds per minute. This made it incredibly versatile because you could use semi-auto for more precise shots and then switch to full auto when you needed to suppress the enemy or in close combat. The 7.92 by 33mm Kurz cartridge it used provided a good balance of stopping power and manageable recoil, so soldiers could keep firing accurately even at high rates of fire. This combination of features allowed soldiers to unleash a lot of bullets quickly, making the StG44 a formidable weapon on the battlefield. The M1 Garand didn't have an automatic mode, but it was still a powerhouse when it came to firepower. This rifle could fire as fast as you could pull the trigger because it was semi-automatic. M1 Garand was the first of its kind and a big step up from the bolt-action rifles most other armies were using at the time. The 30-06 Springfield cartridge packed a serious punch, offering excellent stopping power. The M1 Garand used an 8-round end-block clip, which was quick and easy to reload. While it didn't have the sustained fire capability of the StG44, its rate of fire was impressive for a semi-automatic rifle. Soldiers could put a lot of rounds in a short time, which gave American troops a significant edge in firepower during World War II. The StG44's ability to fire in both semi-automatic and full automatic modes made it incredibly versatile. On the other hand, the M1 Garand's semi-automatic operation and powerful cartridge provided a consistent and reliable rate of fire that was unmatched by bolt-action rifles. In terms of range and accuracy, the StG44 was designed to be effective at medium ranges, around 50 to 200 yards, but it could still hit targets up to 600 meters away. It used a 7.92 by 33 mm Kurz cartridge, which was an intermediate cartridge. This means it wasn't as powerful as a full-sized rifle round, but it had less recoil and was more controllable, which is great for keeping your aim steady during rapid fire. The higher sights on the StG44 helped with aiming, making it accurate for its intended range. Soldiers could rely on it to hit their targets both in close combat and at a decent distance. The M1 Garand used the 30-06 Springfield cartridge, which was a full-powered rifle round. This gave it excellent range and stopping power. It could accurately hit targets up to 500 yards with iron sights. The adjustable sights allowed soldiers to make accurate adjustments for elevation and windage. Whether they were picking off enemies from a distance or in the thick of battle, the M1 Garand's accuracy was a huge asset. The StG44 was perfect for combat in urban areas, but the M1 Garand shined in longer ranges. In general, World War II caused a rapid advancement in technology, more than any war before that. However, the impact of the Sturmgewehr and M1 Garand was the most profound. During World War II, Germany produced about 425,000 StG44 rifles. This number was quite low, partly because Hitler, a key player on the German side, did not welcome the design early enough. Also, it came really late, almost when the war was wrapping up. Despite this, the StG44 had a huge impact on modern infantry weapons. It was the first real assault rifle, a fusion of a submachine gun and a traditional rifle. Its design influenced the development of many post-war firearms and set the standard for future assault rifles. The use of the 7.92 by 33 mm Kurz cartridge and the gas-operated mechanism with a long-stroke piston influenced the reliability and functionality of later rifles. An offspring of the StG44 is the popular AK-47, designed by Mikhail Kalashnikov. Now one of the most widely used firearms in history, the AK-47 adopted the concept of an intermediate cartridge and a similar gas-operated mechanism. Eugene Stoner's American M16 rifle, developed in the 1960s, also drew inspiration from the StG44's design principles. It's designed with an intermediate cartridge, and its focus on controllability and accuracy reflects the StG44's legacy. Many assault rifles that came out after the war, like the Heckler & Koch G3, were inspired by the StG44's design. Over 5.4 million units of the M1 Garand were manufactured during its service life, most of which came from Springfield Armory. The M1 Garand was the first standard-issue semi-automatic rifle adopted by any military and played a crucial role in giving American infantry a significant firepower advantage during World War II. The M1 Garand was seriously praised for its reliability, accuracy, and rate of fire. Its semi-automatic operation allows soldiers to fire much faster than they could with bolt-action rifles, which was a huge advantage in both offense and defense situations. After World War II, the M1 Garand continued to see service in the Korean War and the early stages of the Vietnam War. It was also supplied to Allied nations through various military aid programs, ensuring its presence in numerous conflicts during the mid-20th century. The M1 Garand remains popular in civilian marksmanship programs and competitive shooting events, such as the national matches at Camp Perry. It had a big influence on the development of the M14 rifle, which the U.S. military started using in the late 1950s. The M14 kept many of the M1 Garand's features, like the gas-operated mechanism and rotating bolt, but added a detachable magazine and the ability for selective fire. Even today, the design principles of the M1 Garand live on in civilian firearms. Many semi-automatic hunting and sporting rifles are inspired by its tough, reliable mechanism.